26th session of the UN General Assembly kicked off, with member states being asked to deliberate on two key issues. They're discussing the ending of COVID-19 and redefining a post-pandemic global economy for a healthy planet. We're joined by foreign policy analyst Peter Fabricius. Peter, thank you so much for your time tonight. Before we get into the issues that are going to be really threshed out during this meeting of the General Assembly, I just want to talk about something that, it came up before the meeting. So we know that many countries have already started instituting vaccine mandates, and yet it was said prior to this meeting that the world leaders would not be expected to produce proof or vaccine certificates when attending the session. Is it double standards? What informs a decision such as that?
Yeah, that is double standards. And I mean, I think the problem is that there are some leaders, well, I don't know how many, but there's one leader in particular, Jair Bolsonaro, the Brazilian president, who hasn't been vaccinated and publicly states that. And that's caused quite a lot of discomfort, meeting other leaders. His delegation posted a video of him eating pizzas on the street outside a New York pizza shop because they weren't allowed in because the president is not vaccinated. So that's completely crazy. I mean, the leaders should be setting a much better example than that.
How much of the fact that there isn't necessarily a uniform response to this pandemic and the way in which it has affected different countries, how much of that are you expecting to filter through in the actual discussions that are set to take place under this meeting?
Well, look, what's definitely already filtering through, I mean, from the first day of meetings is the vaccine inequality, which is a major issue also for our government. And the fact that, that you have rich countries that are already giving people booster shots and, vaccinating 12-year-olds and so on, whereas Africa has, I think, vaccinated under 10% or something of its population, falling well short of its target. So that's an issue. President Biden addressed it to a degree in his speech this morning, where he called for a kind of global institution for financing vaccines. Maybe more generally than vaccines, but certainly vaccines amongst them. And so there is a whole issue about that. I mean, certainly President Ramaphosa, I'm sure, will address what he would be calling, I guess, vaccine nationalism when he talks to the Assembly on Thursday. So there is a major issue about the unequal distribution of vaccines.
Of course, part of what it does is that it flies in the face of the intentions, even of a body like the United Nations, which in some ways is set to create a more just world. I mean, whether or not we'll ever get there is another question. But the point is that for countries who are part of the United Nations, surely they shouldn't have to be forced to see why something like equal access to vaccines is, it should be a given, really.
Yeah, I mean, there's this huge, sort of credibility gap always between rhetoric and actions when it comes to a body like the UN, which is, as you say, built on very noble aspirations, but struggled always to meet up to them. It's better, I guess, we should have it than that we shouldn't. But still, it does fall well short of those kind of ideals. And I don't know if anybody is going to take up Biden's suggestion of this global, vaccine financing network. We have these NGOs and so on, like COVAX, which are supposed to be doing that, but they're very much voluntary based, and so it falls upon countries to just come up with the wherewithal. I think probably what we should be seeing more of is at least naming and shaming of countries that do not meet their expectations or even their promises when it comes to funding vaccines for the developing world.
How much of this response, again, gives credence or ammunition to those who long argue the fact that the United Nations and bodies such as, some of your other Bretton Woods institutions, in as much as they're about multilateralism and inclusion, but ultimately they serve the interests of, first world countries?
Yeah, I'm not saying that criticism doesn't apply as strongly to the UN as it does to the Bretton Woods institutions, as you're saying. I mean, and there too one could argue. But yes, I mean, it's what it really is about. If you think about the United Nations, it's an attempt at global governance which doesn't exist. Do you know what I mean? So it's an attempt to behave as though we do have a global government that we can all agree, as though we all, in our own national, government cabinets or parliaments deciding on things, whereas, of course, every nation tends to seek its own interests. And so just trying to get this 193-member nation body to work in concert is a huge challenge.
How much of the post-pandemic recovery strategy will need to include countries to some level opening up their borders and, conversations like what South Africa is having right now with the UK? Are we going to see that being debated in this forum and perhaps even having some kind of resolutions that at least create a benchmark for countries to work from?
Yeah. That is theoretically would be probably quite a good idea. I haven't seen any signs of that happening. It seems, and actually generally the UN has not been very, very active in coordinating the response, to COVID-19, unless, of course, you include the WHO, the World Health Organization, which is a kind of UN body. So that has, of course, played a major role and run into obstacles, as we know, under Trump's presidency in the US, when he refused to cooperate and, in fact, pulled the US out of it temporarily. But I don't think that's happening. In fact, we are seeing, this is related to the previous question, because, to a large degree, countries are opening up to the extent to which international passengers are vaccinated. And in fact, this week we've seen the US, the Biden administration, announce a shift in policies that from early November, it will open its airports, will open the country, including South Africans. It'll open its borders to international travelers, to foreign travelers who have been vaccinated. So that the two go hand in hand. To the degree to which countries are able to vaccinate their populations, generally speaking, they're going to be allowed to travel freely around the world. The UK has been exceptional, and that, not completely so, but certainly from a South African perspective, has been particularly problematic. But I think I don't see any efforts to make that a UN issue.
Do you think that there are any big issues in as far as peace and security that will be on the agenda?
The main issue, I think, just because it involves the two major powers on the world stage, is the growing tension between the US and China. So just before this UN General Assembly, we had Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General, warning that the relationship between China and the US is dysfunctional, as he put it, and actually advising both countries to do something about it. So Biden kind of addressed that to some degree in his speech today, saying, well, look, there's bound to be competition. We're a democratic state, they're not democratic, and then, they've got various issues with China over, like, claiming parts of the South China Sea for itself, trying to exclude other countries from navigating those waters. But he said our intention is to compete in a, if you like, healthy way, but not to push these two countries towards conflict. But what you are seeing, for example, is alliances starting to be formed against China. We have an organization which I think few people in the world have probably heard of, really, called, it's abbreviated as Quad, the Quadrilateral Forum, which comprises the US, Japan, Australia, and India. And it's very much really designed to form a kind of a bulwark against the growing assertiveness of China in the world. You know? So that, I think, is the primary security dilemma or issue that we're facing at the moment. And it's interesting for South Africa in a way. I mean, we're part of BRICS. India is part of BRICS, China is part of BRICS, and yet India is also part of this Quad, which is against China. So very interesting dynamics that we could get kind of caught up with in a way.
South Africa caught up in diplomatic drama, never us, Peter. Foreign policy analyst Peter Fabricius there. Thank you for your time tonight.